This match is not for the faint-hearted. That's what Magnus Carlsen says at the start of game 13. So he's just won an insane time scramble against Alireza Firouzja. That was game 12. He had 0.2 seconds on his clock when he found Queen G2 mate. Alireza's gutted. He hits the desk. He does keep a smile on his face, to his credit though, so he's looking to bounce back in this game. Will he be tilted? Will he find some form? Well, Magnus has white here. As a reminder, this is the final of the Banter Blitz Final 2020. It's the first to 8.5. They're playing blitz chess, 3 minutes aside. Really exciting stuff. So the world champion kicks off with pawn to e4 here. Alireza goes c5, a fighting Sicilian on the board. We have knight f3, pawn to e6, and now a really offbeat system from Magnus. He goes pawn to b3. He's been dabbling with these systems. He went a3 in their last Sicilian. Now we had knight to c6, bishop to b2. The pawn came to d5 now, taking that central space. A capture occurred here, and the bishop came out to b5. Magnus is happy to trade, get some more control of these key central dark squares here. So we had knight to e7 from Alireza. Magnus castles, and here he actually jokes. He starts quoting a Coldplay song saying nobody said this was going to be easy, but nobody said it would be so hard. So he's got real respect for his young opponent by now. Alireza is just 16 years old at the time. So after castles, we had pawn a6 from Alireza, and he's now calculated out the line which occurs on the board. So Magnus captures, the knight recaptures, rook e1 check. This is what you're allowing when you go pawn to a6. The bishop blocked here, and Magnus is surprised. He raises his eyebrows because this allows takes on g7, of course, but now rook g1. I mean, Alireza absolutely loves a g-file attack. We see it so much in his Caro-Kann games. So the bishop comes back. It uses the pin against this one. We had bishop to e6 now, breaking the rook line. So these ones got traded here. Magnus goes d4, a very principled move, and Alireza castles. And although he's a pawn down, Magnus praises him here and says, this is actually a really good fighting chance. He beat me before in a castles queenside game in this match. This could be anyone's game. And here immediately Magnus missteps. Now he goes knight b to d2, which can be okay if you follow up in the right manner, but probably more simple would have just been taking on c5 here. After the queen recaptures, now knight b to d2, and okay, you've taken the pawn here, you're not losing a pawn. What Magnus does is go knight b to d2 first. He allows Alireza to take here, and the only way to actually properly follow this up is with moves like a3 or rook to b1. You basically have to start pushing b4 and playing on the queen side. But what Magnus does is go knight to f1 now. And this is just a really bad follow-up, and he instantly sees it and goes, wow, I've misstepped already. You know, Alireza's tactic has paid off attacking him on the king side. So after knight f1, the problem is we've got queen f6 defending the pawn. It can't be recaptured. And after knight to g3, completing the maneuver, there's bishop g4. Pressuring this knight, soon those pawns will be shattered and you're not winning this d4 pawn back now. So the pawns are only level. Alireza's regained the pawn. He's not a pawn up, but he just has a superior position, lots of pressure and central pawns. So Magnus goes queen d3. He breaks the pin. And now you can already actually take here. This is a decent endgame for black. You can follow up with rook d6. You're going to be pressuring here. We see that in the game. But instead, Alireza flicks in this pawn to h5 move, and Magnus has to go pawn h4 now. If he tries something different, we'll get the same line with everything being chopped on f3, and after the pawn recaptures, you open the g-file, then this push is coming, pinning your knight. So h4 comes, that one's forced. And now Alireza shatters the pawn structure like this, and after g recaptures, we have rook to d6. This beautiful swing of the rook coming in here. And the computer only gives this something like half a pawn better to black, but it's really instructive how Alireza now applies the pressure on Magnus. So king g2 is played first. Magnus wants to hold this pawn, but also prepare rook to h1 later, defending the h-pawn, because he's anticipating this plan coming into f4. So now we had rook f6, and Magnus immediately goes rook to h1. He could have started with rook a to d1, but actually that would have transposed to the game anyway. So knight e5 comes, pressuring the pawn. Magnus goes rook a d1, and it's a great little tricky response, because say you take with the knight here, winning a pawn, holding the d pawn. Well, now can you find the follow-up for white? A really nice tricky little move to insert. So the move here is simply rook to d3. You attack the knight twice now with rook and king, so it has to move away. Say knight e5, well now you pick up on d4. And actually the position's been equalised, white doesn't have the same problems. So what Alireza does here is go rook to f4 first, holding the pawn, really nice squeeze on the position. Magnus goes king f1. He comes away from this line of the rook here. We had rook takes on f3 now. Note, by the way, that you don't want to go with the knight, or then we take this pawn with our knight. If you go rook f5, then we're following up with knight to g3, and we're rock solid here, and we've got a passed pawn. So that's why rook takes on f3 is best. And now you also set up tactics. This rook is pinning the pawn to the king here, so there's a threat to take the knight, and that's why you can't say take here with the rook. And Magnus would have seen this, and that's why he played knight takes on h5. But what he'd completely missed here was rook to f5. Hitting the knight, it's indefensible with one of the rooks, so if it comes back here, then you simply pick it up, you're a whole piece up. What Magnus did in the game was take the pawn here, but once again you're simply losing this knight. Now Alireza first flicks in this knight to c6 move, really nice stuff, opening the defense of the rook here on the d5 pawn after the knight moves away. So we had rook to f4 played, now the rook picked up here, this rook took on f7, and although Magnus has 2 pawns for the piece, this is really tough now. So rook to g4 came, already corralling the first pawn here on h4. The rook came to h3, and after captures here, Magnus now just makes a complete blunder. He's going for counterplay with his rooks, but he's simply walking into rook h1 check, and here he resigned. If you go king to e2, now there's knight d4, Alireza's going to Forktown, that's the game. So an awesome fighting comeback from Alireza. If you want to see the whole playlist, click here, and subscribe to the channel, see below. Thanks for watching, see you soon.